I felt a knot in my stomach as I opened the email titled Family Inheritance. The very thought of it made my skin crawl. 4 years I had been the peacemaker, bending over backward to keep my manipulative family happy while sacrificing my own needs. My brother Lucas was the golden child, the favorite who could do no wrong. Our parents made that abundantly clear over the years with their constant praise and attention. They always painted me as the responsible daughter, the one who would take care of everyone else, while Lucas basked in the spotlight. The upcoming reading of the will felt like the climax of our toxic family dynamic. I could already imagine my mother's smug expression as she handed over the majority of the inheritance to Lucas, as she always did. I had only a week to prepare myself for the inevitable betrayal that awaited me. This time I refused to let it slide. I was tired of being the one left in the shadows, and I was done playing my assigned role in their twisted game. In the past, I would have swallowed my anger, convincing myself that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. But deep down I knew I deserved better. I could feel a fire igniting within me. This was my moment to break free from the chains of their expectations. The thought of confronting my family terrified me, but the idea of remaining silent while my brother took what was rightfully mine was even more unbearable. I had spent years tiptoeing around their feelings, but now I was ready to take a stand. No more. This time I was going to fight for what I deserved. The signs of favoritism in our family were always glaringly obvious, like a flashing neon sign I couldn't ignore any longer. From the start it was clear that Lucas was the favorite. He was the one who received the latest gadgets, the best toys, and endless praise from our parents. I remember the first time I noticed it. I was maybe 8 years old and I had gotten a B on my report card. My mother had looked at me with disappointment, shaking her head while reminding me of how Lucas had aced his exams. He was a star and I was just the shadow. As years rolled on, things didn't change. I became the family's mediator, the one who picked up the pieces whenever Lucas made mistakes. If he crashed the car, I was the one who helped him come up with excuses. If he flunked a class, I was the one who studied with him, making sure he didn't get grounded for his failures. My mother would often say, "You'll always be there to help Olivia," as if that was my only purpose in life. I felt reduced to a mere supporting character in the drama that was Lucas's life. The cost of this favoritism was my own sense of worth, which had eroded year after year. I had poured my heart and soul into trying to be the perfect daughter, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Each time I succeeded at something it felt like a hollow victory. My achievements were met with indifference, as they were always overshadowed by Lucas's antics. Whenever I tried to share my successes, I was met with dismissive comments, or worse, my mother would redirect the conversation back to Lucas, his accomplishments, his needs. As I prepared for the will reading, I could feel the burden of my family's expectations weighing heavier than ever. I had spent years playing the role of the dutiful daughter, but inside I was screaming for recognition and respect. The thought of attending that reading made my stomach churn. I knew I had to brace myself for the inevitable. I could feel the familiar ache of disappointment creeping in, knowing that my share would likely be diverted to Lucas, just like it always had been. On top of all this emotional turmoil, I was burdened with the financial reality of our family. I had put off my own dreams to support my parents and brother. While they indulged in vacations and luxury items, I was stuck living paycheck to paycheck, always telling myself that I was doing it for the family. I had sacrificed my hopes and dreams for their whims, and now it felt like my sacrifices would be further rewarded with betrayal. The thought that my hard work and financial contributions would go unnoticed and unappreciated made my blood boil. As the day of the reading approached, I became increasingly anxious. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was going to be blindsided once again. The past memories of feeling invisible and unworthy flooded my mind. I was tired of being the one who picked up the pieces, the one who put everyone else first while I was left with scraps. I had given my all, yet it was never enough. This time I decided to be different. I was determined to confront my family and put an end to the cycle of neglect and favoritism. I had spent too long as the overlooked daughter, the backup plan, and it was time to take back my power. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was done being the quiet one who always accepted the scraps. The thought of standing up and confronting them filled me with a mix of dread and exhilaration. I was ready to fight for what I deserved, and I wasn't going to let fear hold me back any longer. The day before the reading I was at home trying to distract myself with mundane chores, but my mind was racing. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that was settling like a heavy blanket over me. I was tidying up the living room when I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Instinctively, I leaned in closer, my heart pounding as I recognized my mother's voice mixed with Lucas's laughter. It was a sound that had always made my skin crawl, but this time it felt different. I had to know what they were saying. I crept closer to the doorway, careful not to make a sound. Their conversation floated through the air, casual and devoid of any concern for my feelings. My mother was saying something about how easy it was to keep me in line, how I would always come running whenever they needed help. She's such a good daughter. Always ready to help the family, isn't she? I could hear the smug satisfaction in her tone. Lucas chimed in, laughing. Yeah, she's like our personal assistant. It's hilarious how she thinks she's doing us a favor. I felt my stomach drop. Those words felt like a punch in the gut. I had spent years being the supportive daughter, the one who picked up the pieces and made excuses for their behavior. I had been their pillar, but in reality I was just a resource to them, a convenient option. The realization hit me like a wave. I was nothing more than a tool for their convenience, someone to lean on when it suited them. As I stood there, anger bubbling beneath the surface, I caught sight of a document on the kitchen table. It was partially hidden beneath a stack of papers, but I could see the words inheritance and allocation clearly. Without thinking, I snatched it up, my heart racing as I quickly scanned the contents. The document detailed funds meant for my inheritance, all of it redirected to Lucas. I felt the blood rush from my face. There it was, laid bare in black and white. My share, my lifeline, being handed over to my brother, the golden child. A wave of betrayal washed over me, and I could feel the final thread of my loyalty snap. I had been pushed aside for too long, and now they were taking from me yet again. At that moment I decided I wouldn't just stand by and let them dictate my worth any longer. I was done being passive, done being the good daughter who accepted whatever scraps they tossed my way. I wouldn't confront them with words, I would take action. I took a deep breath and walked away from the doorway, my mind racing with thoughts of how I would change the narrative. The plan started to form in my mind. I wouldn't let them manipulate me anymore. No more playing the role of the dutiful daughter. I was ready to fight for what was rightfully mine. I felt empowered, my anger turning into determination. I had spent years trying to please them to earn their approval, but now I could see clearly. Their approval would never come. I spent the rest of the day preparing for what I knew would be a storm. I gathered my thoughts, wrote down everything I wanted to say, and steeled myself for the confrontation. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I was ready to stand up for myself, no longer the invisible daughter, but a woman ready to claim her place. That night I hardly slept. My mind replayed the events of the day, the laughter, the betrayal, the document that sealed my fate. I envisioned the reading of the will, the smug looks on my family's faces as they handed over my inheritance to Lucas while I sat in silence. But this time would be different. I wouldn't sit in silence. I would make my voice heard, and I would demand what was mine. In the quiet of the night, I felt a sense of resolve settle over me. I had been prepared to accept defeat for far too long, but not anymore. The thought of standing up to my family filled me with a mix of dread and exhilaration. I was done being the quiet one, the one who accepted the scraps. This time I was ready to fight for what I deserved. I closed my eyes, imagining the power I would feel when I finally took a stand. This was going to be my moment, and I wouldn't let it slip away. The morning of the will reading, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. It was as if all the anxiety I had been carrying had finally found a way to settle. I walked into the room where we were gathering, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. I knew I had to be firm. I was tired of being the good daughter, the one who always bent to their will. I glanced at Lucas, who was already smirking, probably imagining how he would bask in the glory of being the favored son once again. My mother was busy arranging the papers on the table, her eyes glinting with anticipation. I could feel their expectations hanging in the air, thick and suffocating, as if they were all waiting for me to play my part in their little drama. But not today. As everyone settled into their seats, I took a moment to collect my thoughts. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say in my head countless times. I needed to be clear and concise. I wasn't going to let their manipulation intimidate me any longer. I was going to lay down my boundaries, and this time I was ready to enforce them. When the lawyer started reading the will, my heart raced. I listened intently, trying to prepare myself for the inevitable disappointment I knew was coming. Sure enough, as the lawyer read through the allocations, Lucas's name came up again and again. The inheritance shall be allocated primarily to Lucas for his contributions to the family, the lawyer read aloud. Each mention felt like a dagger to my heart. I could see Lucas smirking, his eyes glinting with triumph. My mother was nodding along, her face a mask of satisfaction. They had done it again. They were robbing me of my rightful share, and here I was expected to sit there and take it. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. When the lawyer paused, I seized the moment. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor as I did so. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. I refused to accept this, I declared, my voice steady and clear. I felt the weight of their gazes, their confusion and disbelief. But I pushed through the discomfort. No more funding Lucas's lifestyle with my inheritance. I am withdrawing my support completely. The silence was deafening. I could see the panic flash across my mother's face. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment I finally took control of my life. I wasn't going to allow myself to be manipulated any longer. I could feel the rush of empowerment coursing through me as I spoke those words. What do you mean withdrawing your support? My mother snapped, her voice laced with anger. You can't just cut ties like that, Olivia. We're family. I had anticipated this reaction. I was fully aware of the emotional blackmail they would try to use against me. I stood my ground, meeting her gaze with unwavering resolve. Watch me, I replied coolly. I could see Lucas's expression change, the smugness replaced by disbelief. He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. You both have taken advantage of my kindness for far too long. I refuse to be your scapegoat any longer. I deserve better than this, and I'm done playing this role. Their faces twisted in anger and denial. Lucas shouted, You're being selfish. This is all about you, isn't it? I felt a rush of adrenaline. This was it, the moment I had prepared for. I was no longer the invisible daughter, the one who accepted whatever scraps they tossed my way. I was taking a stand, and I could feel the power shifting in the room. I turned to my mother, whose face was flushed with rage. This isn't about being selfish. This is about finally standing up for myself after years of being pushed to the side. You both have treated me like I don't matter, and I will not allow that to continue. Their anger no longer fazed me. I had finally found my voice, and I wasn't going to let them silence me. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision settle in. I was ready to face whatever fallout came next. In that moment I realized that I was claiming my dignity back, and there was no going back from this. As I walked out of the room, I felt a sense of liberation. I knew they would try to manipulate me, to guilt me into submission, but I was done. I had set my limits, and I was prepared to enforce them. I was ready for the chaos to unfold, and I was finally free. As we arrived at the reading, I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. The tension in the air was palpable. My mother, always the orchestrator of our family's drama, stood at the entrance, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. I could see the way she was sizing up the situation, assessing how to play the cards she had dealt for so many years. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, plotting how to maintain control over everything, including me. You wouldn't abandon your family now, would you? She pressed, her voice dripping with feigned concern as we made our way inside. Her tone was the same one she had used countless times before. A mix of guilt and manipulation that had worked on me for years. Not after everything we've done for you? Lucas chimed in, his smug confidence shining through. He always had a way of making me feel small, and today was no different. I could feel their desperation to keep their grip on me tightening, like a noose around my neck. They were banking on my guilt to force me into submission, to make me feel like I owed them something for all the years of their supposed sacrifices. But this time was different. I had finally recognized the truth. Their sacrifices came at the cost of my self-worth. I was sick of being the family's punching bag, the one who was always there to pick up the pieces. My heart raced as I took my seat among the others, the air heavy with unspoken expectations. I could see the glances exchanged between my mother and Lucas, a silent agreement that I was supposed to play the part of the dutiful daughter once again. But I wasn't going to give in to their manipulation this time. I had come too far to let them lead me back into their twisted game. As the lawyer began to read the will, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. The words echoed in my mind, each one a reminder of my place in this family. A place that was beneath them, always overshadowed by Lucas's achievements. I braced myself for the inevitable betrayal that I knew was coming. When the lawyer mentioned Lucas's name yet again, I could feel the heat rising in my chest. The inheritance shall be allocated primarily to Lucas for his contributions to the family, the lawyer read aloud, and I couldn't help but clench my fists. Each mention of Lucas's name felt like a dagger, twisting deeper into the wound of my worthlessness. I could see the smug satisfaction on their faces, the way they reveled in their control, and it made my blood boil. I was done being the good daughter who accepted whatever scraps they tossed my way. No more. I was about to reclaim my power, and I could feel it building inside me like a volcano ready to erupt. I took a deep breath, my resolve hardening. As I sat there, I could hear the laughter from my family echoing in my ears. They were so comfortable in their roles, so accustomed to my compliance, that they couldn't fathom I would stand up to them. I was no longer the silent observer, the one who sat by and let them dictate my worth. I was ready to make my voice heard. When the lawyer paused, I seized the moment. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor as I did so, and felt all eyes turn to me. I refused to accept this, I declared, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. I could see the confusion wash over their faces, disbelief etched in their features. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment I finally took control of my life. I wasn't going to allow myself to be manipulated any longer. No more funding Lucas's lifestyle with my inheritance. I am withdrawing my support completely, I continued, feeling the rush of empowerment course through me. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face twisted in anger, her eyes narrowing as she processed what I had just said. What do you mean withdrawing your support? She spat, her voice laced with venom. You can't just cut ties like that, Olivia. We're family. I stood my ground, refusing to back down. Watch me, I replied coolly, feeling the adrenaline surge through me as I faced them. I could see Lucas's expression shift, the smugness replaced by disbelief. He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. I had anticipated this reaction and I was ready for it. You both have taken advantage of my kindness for far too long. I refuse to be your scapegoat any longer. I deserve better than this, and I'm done playing this role. Their anger was palpable, but it didn't faze me. I had finally found my voice, and I wasn't going to let them silence me. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision settle in. I was ready to face whatever fallout came next. In that moment I realized that I was claiming my dignity back, and there was no going back from this. The reading began with a tense atmosphere, the kind that makes you hold your breath. As the lawyer flipped through the pages of the will, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each thump a reminder of the anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. I focused on my breathing, trying to calm the storm inside me, but it was difficult with my family sitting there, their expectations like a weight pressing down on my shoulders. When the lawyer finally started to read the allocations, I listened intently, my ears straining to catch every word. The sound of Lucas's name echoed through the room like a death knell, each mention a sharp reminder of my position in the family hierarchy. The inheritance shall be allocated primarily to Lucas for his contributions to the family, the lawyer read aloud, and with each mention I could feel the anger rising within me. Lucas's smirk grew wider with each sentence, a smug look that made my blood boil. I could see my mother nodding along, her face alight with satisfaction as if she was relishing the moment. They were both basking in their little game, unaware that I was done playing by their rules. I felt humiliated, the laughter ringing in my ears like a taunt. How could they expect me to sit by and take this? How could they think I would let them rob me of my worth once again? I could see the guests exchanging glances, their faces a mixture of confusion and pity. I was the good daughter, the one who always accepted her role without question, and they were witnessing my family's cruel dynamic unfold in front of them. I felt the heat rising in my chest, the urge to scream and break the silence that was stifling me. But instead I chose to stay quiet, letting the humiliation wash over me like a cold wave. As the lawyer continued reading, I felt the panic rise. I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape from, and the only way out was through confrontation. I could see Lucas's face, his smug expression filled with entitlement, and it made my stomach churn. I knew I had to fight back to reclaim my place in this family, but how? I couldn't just sit there any longer, letting them dictate my worth. I held my breath, waiting for the right moment. As the lawyer paused, I felt a surge of adrenaline rush through me. This was my chance. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, and all eyes turned to me. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I could feel their confusion, their disbelief, and it fueled my determination. I refused to accept this, I declared, my voice steady and clear. It echoed in the room, cutting through the tension like a blade. I felt the weight of their gazes, their confusion and anger, but I pushed through the discomfort. I had been silent for too long, and now it was time for me to speak my truth. No more funding Lucas's lifestyle with my inheritance. I am withdrawing my support completely, I continued, feeling the empowerment wash over me. I was taking back control of my life, and I could see the panic rising in my mother's eyes. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I finally took a stand. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face twisted in anger, her eyes narrowing as she processed what I had just said. What do you mean withdrawing your support? She spat, her voice laced with venom. You can't just cut ties like that, Olivia. We're family. I stood my ground, refusing to back down. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins, the rush of liberation coursing through me. Watch me, I replied coolly, locking eyes with her. I could see Lucas's expression shift, the smugness replaced with disbelief. He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. You both have taken advantage of my kindness for far too long. I refuse to be your scapegoat any longer. I deserve better than this, and I'm done playing this role. Their anger was palpable, but it didn't faze me. I had finally found my voice, and I wasn't going to let them silence me. I felt the tension in the room shift, the dynamic changing as I took a stand. I could see the guests watching, their eyes wide with surprise. This was my moment, my chance to break free from the chains that had bound me for so long. I was no longer the invisible daughter, the one who accepted whatever scraps they tossed my way. I was ready to reclaim my dignity, and there was no turning back. When the lawyer finished reading the will, I could feel the air in the room shift dramatically. I stood up with a sense of purpose, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I refused to accept this. My voice rang out loud and clear, cutting through the heavy silence that had enveloped the gathering. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room, family, friends, and distant relatives, locked onto me, their expressions a mix of shock and confusion. This was a moment I had envisioned countless times in my mind, and now that it was happening, I felt a rush of empowerment course through me. I took a deep breath, drawing strength from the years of pain and manipulation I had endured. No more funding Lucas's lifestyle with my inheritance. I am withdrawing my support completely. The words felt liberating as they left my mouth, each syllable a step closer to reclaiming my life. I could see the panic flash across my mother's face, her eyes widening in disbelief at my declaration. It was as if I had pulled the rug out from under her, her control slipping away in an instant. The room was silent, the tension thick enough to suffocate. I could see Lucas's face contorting in anger and disbelief, his smug demeanor shattered. He was used to being the favored child, the one who always got what he wanted without question, and here I was standing up to him. You're ruining everything, Olivia. He shouted, his voice filled with indignation. I had expected this reaction. For years they had relied on my compliance, my willingness to bend to their will. But I was done with that. I felt a sense of calm wash over me as I faced my mother, who was now glaring at me with a mixture of fury and disbelief. You can't just cut ties like that. She spat, her voice dripping with venom. We're family. Watch me, I replied coolly, my composure unwavering. I could feel their attempts to manipulate me, the emotional blackmail they had used for years, but this time it didn't work. I was not the same person I had been before. I had shed the layers of insecurity and self-doubt that had held me captive for far too long. I could see the anger radiating from my mother, her face flushed with rage. You think you can just walk away from this family? You'll regret this, she yelled, her voice rising. But I stood firm, refusing to let their hostility intimidate me. I won't regret standing up for myself, I shot back, my voice steady. The guests in the room had fallen silent, their expressions revealing a mix of shock and intrigue. I could hear the whispers starting to circulate among them, the murmurs of disbelief at the scene unfolding before them. They were witnessing a dynamic that had been hidden for far too long, and I could feel a strange sense of satisfaction knowing that my truth was finally coming to light. As I stood there, I realized I was no longer afraid of their reactions. I had spent years tiptoeing around my family's feelings, always the dutiful daughter, always the peacemaker. But today was different. I was no longer willing to sacrifice my own happiness for their approval. I turned back to Lucas, who was still seething in anger. "You've taken advantage of my kindness for far too long," I said, my voice unwavering. "I refuse to be your scapegoat any longer. I deserve better than this, and I'm done playing this role." Their faces twisted in anger and denial, but I felt a rush of adrenaline. I had finally found my voice, and it was empowering. I was no longer the invisible daughter, the one who accepted whatever scraps they tossed my way. I was taking a stand, and I could feel the power shifting in the room. The tide was turning, and I was ready to embrace it. I took a moment to let my words sink in, watching as panic spread across my mother's face. She opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. It was as if I had stunned her into silence, a moment that felt surreal yet completely liberating. I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. "Do you really think you can just walk away from this?" my mother finally managed to say, her voice shaky with anger. "You'll regret this decision, Olivia. You're throwing everything away." I shook my head, feeling more resolute than ever. "No, I'm reclaiming my life. I'm tired of being treated like I don't matter. I'm tired of being the backup plan, the one who is always there to clean up after you and Lucas." Their attempts to manipulate me were failing, and I could see the realization dawning on their faces. This was no longer a game for me. I had taken control, and I wasn't going to let them push me around anymore. As I turned to leave the room, I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. I had finally taken a stand, and it felt exhilarating. I knew they would try to manipulate me, to guilt me into submission, but I was done. I had set my limits, and I was prepared to enforce them. I was ready for the chaos to unfold, and I was finally free. As I stood there, the chaos that erupted around me was almost surreal. Lucas erupted, his voice cutting through the air, sharp and accusatory. "You ruined everything," he yelled, his face flushed with anger. It was the kind of rage that comes from feeling cornered, and I could see it in his eyes. He was desperate to regain control of the situation. My mother, red-faced and fuming, shot me a look that could have burned a hole through steel. "You'll regret this, Olivia," she spat, each word dripping with venom. Their anger was palpable, a physical force that pushed against me, but I stood my ground unshaken. I could feel the eyes of the guests on me, an audience witnessing this family drama unfold. They were seeing the true nature of my family dynamic for the first time, and I felt a strange mix of validation and empowerment coursing through me. These were people who had only ever known the facade my family presented, perfectly polished from the outside, but rotting on the inside. I could see the confusion and sympathy in their expressions as they watched my mother and brother lash out, revealing their true selves. It was almost satisfying to know that the mask was slipping in front of others. "Do you even realize how selfish you're being?" Lucas continued, his voice rising. "This isn't just about you, Olivia. You're throwing away everything we've built as a family." But his words fell flat. I could see the desperation in his eyes, the panic creeping in as he realized I wasn't falling for the same old tricks. I had been the scapegoat for too long, and now that I had found my voice, he was powerless against me. "You think this is about family?" I shot back, my voice steady despite the chaos around me. "What family? The one that has always ignored my needs and treated me like a doormat? No more, Lucas. I'm done being the one who picks up the pieces of your mess." My words hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time, I felt a sense of control that had been absent for years. My mother tried to regain control of the situation, her face contorting with rage. "You're being ungrateful, Olivia. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" Her voice shook with emotion, but it was the anger that dominated. I could see the wheels turning in her head, the attempt to shift the blame onto me, to make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. But I was no longer that person. I had broken free of her emotional chains. Ungrateful? I echoed, disbelief coloring my tone. You think I owe you something for the life you've given me? For the years of being belittled and ignored? I could feel the tension in the room crackling. And I knew that I had crossed a line that they never thought I would. I was no longer the compliant daughter who accepted their treatment without question. I had found the strength to confront them, and it felt liberating. The guests were shifting uncomfortably, their expressions a mix of shock and intrigue. They were witnessing a side of my family that had been hidden behind closed doors for far too long. I could see the whispers starting to circulate among them, and part of me felt a rush of satisfaction knowing that my family's facade was crumbling right before their eyes. They were no longer the perfect family. They were just as flawed as everyone else. Lucas, realizing he was losing control, tried to shift the narrative. You're making a huge mistake, Olivia. You'll regret this when you realize you're all alone. You think you can just walk away from us? We're still family. His voice was desperate, tinged with a hint of fear. But I could see it for what it was, an attempt to emotionally blackmail me, to make me doubt my decision. But I stood firm, unwavering. Family doesn't treat each other like this. Family supports one another, not uses each other as pawns in a game of control. I refused to let you manipulate me anymore. I could feel the strength in my words, and for the first time I believed them. The chaos continued, with my mother now trying to rally the guests to her side. Olivia's just going through a phase. She'll come to her senses. We've always been there for her. There was desperation in her tone, and I could see her trying to re-establish her authority as the matriarch, but it was too late. The truth was out, and I wasn't going to let them rewrite the narrative anymore. I could see the disbelief washing over the faces of the guests. They were beginning to see my family for what they truly were: manipulative, toxic, and utterly self-serving. I felt a swell of pride at the realization that I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was a woman who had finally stepped into her power, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. As the chaos unfolded, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I wasn't just standing up for myself. I was breaking the cycle of abuse that had plagued my family for years. I was reclaiming my narrative, and no one could take that away from me. I was ready for the fight, ready to face whatever consequences came my way. The sight of my mother and Lucas, once my tormentors, now looked frail and desperate. Their attempts to manipulate the situation were failing, and I could see it in their eyes. They were losing their grip on me, and the power dynamic was shifting in a way they had never anticipated. I felt a rush of liberation wash over me as I recognized that I had finally taken control of my life. Good luck convincing anyone that this is my fault, I said, my voice steady. You've shown your true colors today, and I refuse to be a part of it any longer. With that, I turned to leave, feeling the weight of years of manipulation lift off my shoulders. I was done playing their games. As I walked out of that room, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had taken a stand, faced my family's wrath, and emerged victorious. I was finally free from their toxic hold, and I was ready to embrace my new reality. I had reclaimed my dignity, and nothing could take that away from me. As the chaos around me continued to unfold, I stood at the threshold, a mix of emotions churning inside me. I could hear the angry voices of my mother and Lucas, their attempts to regain control of the narrative echoing in my ears. But as the adrenaline coursed through my veins, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This was not just a confrontation. This was the moment I had been waiting for. A chance to expose the truth behind the facade my family had maintained for so long. I watched as Lucas, flustered and desperate, tried to gather his thoughts. His confidence had evaporated, and all that remained was a man scrambling to hold on to the status he had taken for granted. You can't just walk away from this, Olivia. We're family, he shouted, his voice cracking under the pressure. But the weight of his words felt hollow now. Family. It was a term he had wielded like a weapon against me for years, but I no longer felt the sting of it. I had seen the ugly truth beneath the surface, and I was done letting it manipulate me. The guests, who had once been mere spectators, were now witnesses to a revelation. I could see the confusion on their faces shifting to intrigue, as they began to grasp the reality of my family dynamics. My mother, sensing the tide turning against her, attempted to rally them, her voice dripping with desperation. Olivia is just going through a phase. She'll regret this decision. But it was too late. Her words were falling on deaf ears. The guests were observing the cracks in her carefully crafted image, and I could see doubt creeping into their expressions. Suddenly, I felt a surge of empowerment. I had broken free from the chains that had held me captive for far too long, and now I was in control. I took a step forward, my voice steady and unwavering. You all have seen how they've treated me for years. I've been the one who picked up the pieces, the one who took the blame for their mistakes. No more. I refuse to be their scapegoat any longer. I deserve better than this. The words felt like a declaration, a battle cry that resonated in the air. I could see the panic flash across my mother's face. She was losing control, and it was thrilling to witness. She had always relied on intimidation to keep me in line, but now that tactic was backfiring. I was no longer afraid of her rage. Instead, I felt liberated, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I had finally found my voice, and I was ready to use it. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could sense the shift in the air. The guests were no longer just observers. They were now participants in my liberation. I could hear whispers, murmurs of disbelief and sympathy as they processed what was happening. They were witnessing a dynamic that had been hidden behind closed doors. And I felt empowered knowing that my truth was finally coming to light. As Lucas continued to flounder, I could see the cracks in his facade widening. He was struggling to maintain his composure, and it was both satisfying and surreal to watch. You think you can just walk away from us? You're throwing everything away, Olivia. He shouted, desperation lacing his voice. But I was done with his manipulation. I stood my ground, resolute. You've taken advantage of my kindness for far too long. I'm not here to support your lifestyle. I'm done. The chaos escalated as my mother, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to regain her footing. Olivia, you can't just throw away everything we've built as a family, she cried, her voice rising in pitch. But her words felt empty, echoing like a hollow shell. I had seen the true nature of my family, and I wasn't going to let them rewrite the narrative any longer. Their attempts to manipulate me were failing, and I could see it in their eyes. They were losing their grip on me, and it was exhilarating. I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the truth of my experiences. The years of being belittled and ignored had forged a strength within me that I never knew existed. I was no longer the compliant daughter who accepted their treatment. I was a woman ready to reclaim her narrative, and I could feel the power shifting in the room. Good luck convincing anyone that this is my fault, I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. You've shown your true colors today, and I refuse to be a part of this toxic dynamic any longer. With those words, I turned to leave, feeling the weight of years of manipulation lift off my shoulders. I was done playing their games. As I walked out of that room, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had taken a stand, faced my family's wrath, and emerged victorious. I was finally free from their toxic hold, and I was ready to embrace my new reality. The world outside felt brighter, as if the sun had begun to shine after a long dark storm. I was no longer bound by their expectations or their emotional blackmail. I was reclaiming my life, and nothing could take that away from me. Months later, I sat on my balcony, sipping coffee and watching the sunrise. The world felt different now, lighter. I had distanced myself from my family, and it was the best decision I had ever made. The chaos of their lives no longer consumed me. Instead, I was discovering what it meant to truly live for myself. I had reclaimed my time, my energy, and most importantly, my peace. No more phone calls filled with guilt or manipulative requests. No more feeling like I was second best. I had broken free from the toxic ties that had bound me for so long. In the weeks that followed my departure from that family drama, I focused on rebuilding my life. I took a long overdue vacation, something I had always put off to cater to my family's needs. I traveled to a beautiful beach destination, indulging in the luxury I had denied myself for years. I stayed in a lovely hotel, enjoying the sunrise over the ocean and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. It was pure bliss. I also treated myself to some home improvements, turning my living space into a sanctuary that reflected my personality and dreams. I bought new furniture, painted the walls in soothing colors, and created a cozy reading nook. Each change brought me joy, a reminder that I was worthy of happiness. The best part of this newfound freedom was the silence. I cherished the quiet moments, whether I was reading a book, going for a walk, or simply enjoying my coffee in peace. I had finally found my voice and my strength, and it felt incredible. I was no longer a pawn in their game. I was living life on my terms. And that was the sweetest victory of all.